Jasmine Wright stared at the blue glow of her company laptop and felt the impossible math of the internet staring back. 3 million views overnight. It didn't feel like a number. It felt like a siren, a rushing in her ears, the way sound becomes water during turbulence. The video was only 4 minutes long, just shaky phone footage and cabin whispers, but it had swallowed an airline and spat out a national argument. Her triplets, Zion, Isaiah, and Elijah, were captured in perfect, infuriating clarity, being marched from their first-class seats to the back of the plane while a row of white passengers looked on, startled but still. Jasmine played it twice, then a third time, not because she doubted what she'd seen but because repetition made the fury settle into bone. She was a CEO, the founder of Phoenix Digital Solutions, a cybersecurity firm that had climbed from a rented co-working desk to a $200 million valuation. She could decode zero-day exploits with a whiteboard and a marker. She could calm jittery investors with a single slide. But this was the ancient code of America, the one nobody wrote down and everybody learned anyway. Before the flight, she'd been cutting strawberries in the kitchen while the boys practiced free throws under the dusk-gold light of their Buckhead backyard. Zion called out from the mudroom, "Mom, did you confirm our seats for San Francisco?" And Jasmine had wiped her hands on a towel and smiled at the absurdity of his doubt. "First class, all 4 together," she'd said. Because why not do this one thing right after 2 relentless years of deadlines and missed birthdays and late-night pizza boxes curling at the edges of their trash bin? She'd promised Fisherman's Wharf and Alcatraz and a bike ride under the red sweep of the bridge. Elijah, artist heart and quiet eyes, had been oddly excited about the prison tour, the way old stones remember every footstep. Isaiah, always cataloging, had compiled an itinerary with timestamps and weather contingencies. Zion, the oldest by 3 minutes and a lifetime of protective instinct, only cared that they sit together. It mattered to him. This business of belonging where you were promised you belonged. They were dressed like any comfortable Friday morning family at Hartsfield-Jackson. The boys in black joggers and hoodies in 3 different colors so their teachers could tell them apart if they happened to appear in a slideshow. Jasmine in a blazer and jeans and the soft armor of a woman used to being the only one in a room who looked like her. The check-in agent had been courteous enough, the way service people are courteous to money, and the TSA agent had been indifferent as he flagged the triplets for random screening, the kind that somehow learned to recognize melanin. The boys had taken off their sneakers and handed over their backpacks without complaint. "You okay?" Jasmine asked afterward. "Fine," Zion said, jaw tight. "The usual," Isaiah added, as if naming it shrank it. Elijah wasn't fine, but he smiled anyway, the way he did when things got loud. At the gate, a flight attendant with a tight blonde ponytail kept flicking glances at them like lint she couldn't quite remove. Heather Miller, the name badge said, and Jasmine cataloged it without meaning to. When the first-class call sounded, they boarded with their right to comfort intact. The cabin looked like money always looks. Wide aisles, obedient light, champagne that made a nervous fizzing sound at the lip. Jasmine and Elijah took 2A and 2B. Zion and Isaiah slid into 2C and 2D. Heather's smile faltered when she asked for their boarding passes again, even though she'd watched them get scanned 12 feet earlier. Jasmine handed them over without a lecture. She'd learned a long time ago that composure is a blade sharper than outrage. Amara called as people jostled past with roller bags and apologies. "Quick question on the Bay investors," her COO said. Jasmine stepped into the jet bridge for better reception, the way you step out of a room to keep the room intact. It took 5 minutes, long enough for a person to show you exactly who they are if they've been waiting to. While Jasmine's voice traveled down aluminum walls and across 1,000 miles of fiber, Heather leaned into the boys with the confidence of someone who knows the captain wears her mistake like a badge. "There's a seating issue," she said with a smile that never touched her eyes. "You'll need to move to the main cabin." Zion held the ground of his seat with his spine. "Our mom booked these. She'll be right back." Isaiah, already a litigator in a different lifetime, produced the confirmation email like evidence and angled it toward authority. Elijah asked the only question that mattered. "Can we wait for our mother?" Heather used the tone people use when they've convinced themselves they're saving the world from the wrong kind of people. "Either move voluntarily or we can remove you for non-compliance." The threat wasn't loud, but it was practiced. Isaiah tilted his phone into video and kept his face calm. An older white woman across the aisle leaned forward, soft-voiced and clear-eyed. "They were here first," she said. Heather dismissed her with a nod designed to wound. Then the choreography, the triplets rising, 3 empty seats blooming behind them, a couple sliding in with a grateful shrug, a man taking the seat where Jasmine's scarf still held her perfume. When Jasmine returned, the space was different. Strangers sat where her boys had been, and vacancy sat where her certainty had been. "Excuse me," she said, not loud but undeniably present. "These are our seats." The couple apologized without moving. Heather pretended busy, the centuries-old skill. "Where are my sons?" Jasmine asked the aisle, the cabin, the uniformed woman whose name she now held like a key. The captain emerged, all authority and liability. Jasmine laid out the facts like a chessboard. For tickets, scanned, seated, 5 minutes away, reappearing to a substitution without cause. He asked for boarding passes. The stranger's slips betrayed them. Row 4, row 5, anywhere but here. He asked Heather to fetch the boys. She went, tight-lipped, and returned leading 3 identical souls whose expressions were 3 separate storms. Zion's lightning, Isaiah's cold rain, Elijah's low rumble that made the ground feel unreliable. The passengers relocated to their real seats, eyes dropping like they'd been taught to avert. Jasmine didn't give a speech. She wanted proof. "Your ID number," she told Heather, voice even. "I'll be filing a formal complaint." Heather tried the old misdirection of tone, "You're making this about something it isn't," and then let the mask slip just enough for everyone nearby to see the outline of it. Some people aren't used to seeing certain people in first class. Isaiah's camera heard it, and so did the captain. He reassigned Heather to the galley and pledged an apology Jasmine didn't believe but would require anyway. The flight took 5 hours and felt like a held breath. In San Francisco, the boys wanted room service and curtains drawn. Isaiah posted the video before Jasmine could ask him not to. He posted it because he'd learned that sunlight isn't always polite, and because sometimes the only way to be believed is to bring witnesses. The views multiplied like bacteria. Comments flooded in waves. Rage, relief, racism dressed as skepticism. Continental called with a director of customer relations voice. Hushed and expensive. Administrative leave, an investigation, full refunds, vouchers, miles. "This isn't about compensation," Jasmine said, the sentence clean as air. "It's about accountability." The CEO called the next day with the gravity of a man whose stock was down 7% and his brand was having an identity crisis. He promised training, and then he promised justice, and then he promised money. "I'll have counsel review whatever you send," Jasmine said. But systems don't change because a single person loses a job. Back home, their driveway became a border. News vans idled across the street. The HOA chair, who had once cited her for a mailbox paint color infraction, called to say they'd hired temporary security for the neighborhood. At school, the boys were celebrity and spectacle and lesson plan all at once. Some teachers asked gentle questions. Others overcompensated with sugar-sweet awkwardness. Elijah ate lunch in the library, texting his brothers that the cafeteria felt like a stage. Jasmine scheduled therapy before anyone said they needed it, because she knew the way trauma borrows voices until everyone is speaking from the same wound. The board at Phoenix Digital wanted a strategy. One member cautioned about the company being too associated with controversy, as if the controversy were a storm they might catch by walking in the rain. Another suggested they lean into leadership on corporate equity. Amara, steady as a metronome, asked the only 2 questions that mattered. What do we owe our people? What do we owe the truth? Jasmine signed off the call and stared at her reflection in the black glass of her monitor until the glass gave it back as someone steadier than she felt. The email from HR arrived 2 weeks later like a plot twist that a lesser writer would have cut for unbelievability. Heather Miller had applied to Phoenix Digital for a senior customer relations role. She had not disclosed a termination, only an end date. The background check colored in the blanks. 5 jobs in 5 years, a handful of customer complaints that had accumulated like dust in corners nobody checked, a pattern you could see if you turned on all the lights. "She doesn't realize Phoenix is yours," Amara said, half amused, half annoyed by the universe's dare. "She knew me as Ms. Wright," Jasmine said, tasting the old familiarity of anonymity. Schedule the interview. The legal team wrote a script that avoided traps, real and imagined. We record final interviews, Marcus from HR reminded everyone, tapping the small camera at the center of the table. The first 2 rounds went as expected. Heather answered like a person who had done this job forever and learned how to sound like competence. She faltered only when Jamal from engineering joined the panel, the way some people falter when a truth they've buried enters the room breathing. For the final interview, Heather walked in wearing the same tight ponytail, the same posture, the same smile that erased itself when she registered Jasmine. She recognized her and pretended she didn't. Jasmine introduced herself, the company, the colleagues. Professional questions, professional answers. Then a gap on the resume. A misunderstanding, Heather said. Blown out of proportion. We believe in naming things, Jasmine replied. The investigation called it a violation of non-discrimination policy. The conversation slid off the rails with the inevitability of gravity. You people make everything about race, Heather snapped after a minute of careful dancing, then tried to rearrange the sentence and failed. Marcus's pen stilled. Amara's expression didn't change, but the room did. Jasmine kept her voice soft because soft lands deeper. Do you recognize me? She asked. Heather's eyes gave her away. You removed my sons from their seats and handed them to strangers. You separated them into different rows in the back while I was 10 steps away. Heather's composure fractured. She called it suspicion, then policy, then safety. Finally, she called it what it was, the part that had lived under her tongue waiting for air. Those boys didn't belong in first class. Everyone was thinking it. I was just the one willing to act. Silence held them all like a net. Thank you for your candor, Jasmine said, the words precise enough to be placed in a museum. The interview ended. Heather stormed out with the threat of lawyers trailing behind her like a bad perfume. 2 days later, the lawsuit arrived. Discriminatory hiring, emotional distress, entrapment. The press release framed Heather as the wrong party, ambushed by a powerful black CEO whose personal vendetta had ruined a hardworking woman. Cable news booked her for a soft chair and sympathetic lighting. She cried on cue and used phrases like reverse discrimination and destroyed my career and just doing my job. The narrative tried to turn, not because facts had changed but because performance is an old, effective kind of spell. Phoenix's legal chief, Eleanor, said the claims were weak and the optics tricky. The judge denied an emergency motion to block the interview recording, noting that Heather had already described it publicly. At 3 p.m., the full unedited video went live with a 6-sentence intro from Jasmine about transparency and the right of the public to hear what really happened. There were no violins under her words, no cuts for drama, just a room, a table, 3 professionals, and a woman telling on herself. Heather's sentence, the one she'd wish she'd never said, sat in the center like a lit match. Those boys didn't belong in first class. Everyone was thinking it. People heard it and felt the floor tilt under them. Some had known all along. Others had needed to hear the prejudice with its own breath. The lawsuit withdrew the next morning, a terse filing without apology. The network segment went quiet. The comments shifted from accusation to reckoning. Jasmine didn't dance in the kitchen or pop champagne. She took a long shower, let the water pry her shoulders from her ears, and then sat with her sons on the living room floor eating takeout straight from the cartons the way they used to on Friday nights before the world decided they were content. Is it over? Elijah asked, voice small with hope. This part is, Jasmine said. The bigger part, the part we can influence, that keeps going. Zion wanted consequences that felt like justice. Isaiah wanted systems that made future videos unnecessary. Jasmine wanted sleep, and then she wanted to build something more durable than outrage. Continental announced a training program developed with civil rights organizations. It sounded like a press release because it was, but it also sounded like a door. The NAACP called. A university invited Jasmine to lecture on the mechanics of bias in customer experience. A podcast wanted the boys on as guests. Jasmine said yes only after making sure the host understood they were teenagers, not symbols. Phoenix's stock recovered and then ticked up, not because the market suddenly found its conscience but because competence under fire looks like leadership on a chart. Inside Phoenix, Jasmine made permanent what Crisis had revealed. Recorded interviews as standard, an ethics bar that wasn't a suggestion, a customer impact council that included people who'd been ignored by design for decades. On a Saturday morning heavy with Georgia heat, the triplets shot around the driveway while Jasmine trimmed the basil on the kitchen windowsill. Her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't know. It was the older woman from first class, the one who had spoken up softly and been dismissed efficiently. She'd found Jasmine through a mutual connection, apologized for the intrusion, and written 3 lines that made Jasmine sit down at the counter. "I wish I had stood up louder. I believed you would handle it, and you did, but silence is its own convenience. I'm learning." Jasmine typed back, "Thank you. We're all learning." In the fall, at Westlake Academy's parent night, a father who had once insisted the boys must be on some kind of special scholarship approached her near the gym. He cleared his throat and said he'd seen the video and it made him uncomfortable in all the right ways. "I thought first class meant something else," he admitted, cheeks red. "Maybe it just means we all get there without being made smaller." Jasmine said nothing generous she didn't mean, and nothing cruel she'd regret. Progress, she'd decided, lives somewhere in the space between those two. Months later, the airline case file lived on a hard drive in Eleanor's office. The internet had found new arguments, and the triplets were back to being boys who fought about socks in the laundry and sat shoulder to shoulder on the couch during playoff games. But something had shifted in their geometry. Zion's anger had edges you could now put down safely. Isaiah had turned his meticulousness outward, advising the school's diversity council with the same intensity he brought to calculus proofs. Elijah had started a series of charcoal sketches called Cabin Light, all window frames and silhouettes, and one drawing in which 3 empty first-class seats looked like a question mark you could sit inside. One evening, as autumn folded itself into early dark, Jasmine stood at the stove stirring her grandmother's jam, sweet, slow, inevitable, and listened to the boys arguing in the backyard about a foul that was not, in Zion's opinion, a foul. She thought of all the doors she'd walked through and all the doors she'd been kept from. She thought of the gate agents and managers and CEOs who had measured her worth in decibels instead of data. She thought about Heather's sentence, how it still echoed if you let it, and she wondered whether the world was any different for having heard it out loud. Then she pictured the captain's face when Isaiah handed him the text that said "I recorded everything," pictured the judge denying the injunction, pictured the email from a stranger who regretted whispering when she should have spoken. Change never arrives in a parade. It sneaks in as policy. It lingers as practice. It lives in a boy turning his phone camera on and a mother who has learned to keep receipts. Later that night, Jasmine clicked open a blank document and began drafting Phoenix's next initiative. A joint fellowship with 3 HBCUs for students in customer experience analytics, a pipeline designed to put the right minds in the right rooms before the wrong moments happen. She titled the file "Belonging is a System." It was not a slogan. It was homework. In the doorway, Elijah leaned and watched her type. "Mom," he said, "when we're men, will this be over?" Jasmine paused, fingers hovering above the keys. "It will be better," she said, and believed herself enough to keep writing. "And when it isn't, you'll know what to do." He nodded and crossed the room to kiss her cheek, leaving a smudge of graphite. She let it stay. Some marks you carry on purpose, a reminder of what your hands are for.